In the final years of World War II, a terrifying new weapon emerged from the skies over the Pacific: the Kamikaze. These were no ordinary aerial assaults. These were suicide missions carried out by young Japanese pilots who believed they were sacrificing themselves for the future survival of the Japanese Empire. But who were these men? Why did Japan resort to such a desperate measure? And what was the real impact of the Kamikaze on the outcome of the war? The word kamikaze in Japanese translates to divine wind, a reference to a typhoon that famously saved Japan from the Mongol invasions twice in the 13th century. By 1944, the Japanese Navy was extremely weakened after the Battle of the Philippine Sea, losing 2 fleet carriers out of the 3 sent. This paved the way for American forces to land on the Philippines. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi of the Japanese Imperial Navy took command of the 1st Air Fleet in the northern Philippines in the summer of 1944. Recognising the horrendous odds his pilots and planes faced against the now overwhelming strength of American air power, he proposed the formation of suicide attack units to even the odds against the Americans and Allies. He said, quote, "In my opinion, there is only one way to assure that our meagre strength will be effective to a maximum degree. That is, to organise suicide attack units, composed of A6M0 fighters, armed with 250 kg bombs, with each plane to crash dive into an enemy carrier. These pilots would deliberately crash their planes into Allied warships. To give these missions a nationalistic and spiritual renaissance, the term kamikaze was revived. The implication was clear. These suicide pilots were the new divine wind, meant to protect Japan from invasion, just as the typhoons had centuries earlier. Kamikaze pilots were not elite aviators. In fact, most received only the bare minimum of flight training of between 30 to 50 hours, just enough to get them airborne, navigate to their target, and dive. These young men were often selected through group volunteering, where officers would ask for raised hands. In a culture where refusal could be seen as weakness or betrayal, few dared to decline. Although some were enthusiastic believers in the mission, many were silently terrified, confused, or resigned to their fate. Once selected, kamikaze pilots underwent physical and emotional preparation. In their final days, the chosen few were treated like heroes, drank sake, and often wrote their final letters home to their families. In one letter from 2nd Lieutenant Ishizo Hayashi, dated March 31st, 1945, wrote, "I am pleased to have the honour of having been chosen as a member of the Special Attack Force that is on its way into battle, but I cannot help crying when I think of you, Mum. When I reflect on the hopes you had for my future, I feel so sad that I'm going to die without doing anything to bring you joy." Their aircraft usually consisted of outdated fighters and bombers retrofitted with explosives or extra fuel to ensure maximum damage. Pilots were launched in waves, sometimes escorted by other fighters, but were never expected to return. If a target couldn't be found or their aircraft faced mechanical troubles, some pilots returned to their bases and awaited to fly again, while others reportedly chose to ditch at sea rather than fail their mission. The psychological burden was immense, especially as Japan's defeat became more certain by the hour. The first successful kamikaze attack was carried out by 23-year-old Navy Lieutenant Yukio Seki during the Battle of Leyte Gulf on the 25th of October 1944. He led a formation of 5 A6M0s armed with 250 kg bombs. It is not known whether it was Seki or one of his wingmen, but one of the flight of Zeros smashed into the flight deck of escort carrier USS St. Lo, causing massive explosions throughout the hangar bay, killing 143 American sailors and resulting in the sinking of the ship. This would be the first successful kamikaze attack and the largest ship sunk by any kamikaze sortie during the Second World War. Skipping ahead to 1945, during the invasion of Iwo Jima, the escort carrier USS Bismarck C was hit by 2 kamikaze planes deployed from Kyushu Airfield 750 miles away. Within 90 minutes, her explosions and fires caused the ship to sink. The Essex-class carrier USS Saratoga was also smashed by 5 kamikaze attacks, disabling her for the rest of the war. These attacks alone saw the Americans lose over 400 personnel at the cost of a very small amount of pilots for the Japanese. However, over the bloody fields and cliffs of Okinawa, the kamikaze struck the fear into the Allied servicemen. As it was 340 miles away from the Japanese mainland, the Japanese High Command saw this as the final stand of the Empire, and so more kamikaze units were established and sent into the fray. Both fleet carriers, the USS Bunker Hill and USS Enterprise, were struck and put out of action by kamikazes during the battle. On April 11th, 1945, off the island of Okinawa, the USS Missouri, BB-63, a massive Iowa-class battleship, came under attack by a Japanese kamikaze pilot. Missouri, serving as the flagship of the Pacific Fleet under Admiral William Ball Halsey, was a prime target due to her size and firepower. That afternoon, a Japanese A-6M Zero fighter approached the ship at low altitude. Despite heavy anti-aircraft fire from the battleship and its accompanying fleet, the kamikaze managed to evade destruction long enough to dive towards the starboard side of the ship. The plane struck Missouri just below the main deck near turret number 3, one of her massive 16-inch gun emplacements. The crash caused a fiery explosion and scattered debris across the deck, but the ship's armour absorbed the brunt of the impact. Remarkably, the damage was only superficial, and no American crew members were killed or seriously injured. The USS Laffey, a small Navy destroyer, fought off 22 kamikaze planes and earned itself the nickname the ship that would not die. The ship suffered multiple hits by kamikazes and bomb strikes, but did not sink. Over the course of the battle, the kamikaze would damage 360 ships, ranging from small landing craft to destroyers, the most of any engagement in the Pacific, with the loss of 36 ships. However, the kamikaze strategy, ultimately, was not enough to turn the tide of the war. While kamikaze attacks inflicted heavy damage and sowed fear among Allied fleets, they did not achieve their intended strategic effect. Japan could not produce enough planes or train enough pilots to sustain the tactic. Moreover, it hardened American resolve. The psychological toll was immense, but instead of weakening Allied momentum, it contributed to calls for even more decisive action, including the eventual use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In a tragic sense, the kamikaze were both a symbol of Japan's fierce resistance and a sign of its growing desperation. The kamikaze remain one of the most haunting symbols of World War II. Young men turned into human bombs, sacrificed for a lost cause. Their story is not about war tactics or military history, it's about ideology, desperation, and the human cost of conflict. Today, Japan stands mixed on whether they are heroes or victims, but one thing is for sure, in my personal opinion, the kamikaze embody both of those ideals. Thanks for watching. I've been Files from the Front, and I'll see you guys in the next video.